Hello, everybody. Welcome to the BFDG Design Forum for 13 Lives. I'm Blair Barnett, the BFDG Chair. The Guild was formed over 70 years ago with the aim of raising the standards and profile of the art department and protecting the interests of its members, and those core principles still apply today. We are a fantastic community of over 600 accredited skilled technicians and designers whose talents span the various branches of the art department within film and television. Joining me tonight are production designer Molly Hughes, from I'm Thinking of Ending Things and The Fault of Our Stars, and art direction on all kinds of Harry Potter things, and our supervising art director, Brandt Gordon, and set decorator, Emma Rudkin. And they're just going to be discussing their award-winning feature film, 13 Lives. Hello, everybody.
Hi. We're hoping Emma is going to join us. It's 5 a.m. there where she is, or it's just turning 5 a.m. But we have high hopes that she'll be with us momentarily.
I love these international things, people coming in from this way or the other. We're all
3 different countries. Brandt's in Canada. I'm in America. You're in the UK.
Oh, actually, I'm in Budapest right now. So it gets even more interesting. Well, let's just get down to the nitty-gritty. Tell me about the process of designing caves, particularly about how much VFX and set extensions were used compared to what you're building, and how you worked with the VFX team when trying to create these caves.
So when I read the script, I thought, oh, how do I get excited about all these caves? Right. And then, but then, I read it really early. We didn't have a studio yet when I read it. So, that's a process that you go through. I go through with Ron. I've gone through now a couple of times and now on another project, but, you start early and you kind of help them develop. You're sort of developing it together. So in that process, my excitement for it grew, and I started to understand it from his point of view as, getting inside the tension, having the audience inside inside the cave, really experiencing what it was like for these divers.
Claustrophobia, they must have been having.
Yes, and the fact that it never stopped raining, and there was so much chaos, and there were so many people there. And then there were these religious and cultural aspects that they were unfamiliar with. And I was very unfamiliar with. So that was an exciting part of the process too, just culturally getting my head around something totally different. So then I got really pretty excited about it. And thankfully Brandt got excited about it too. And we convinced him to go to Australia. But on the visual effects side of things, Ron likes to do as much as possible in camera on these kinds of films. I've only done sort of documentary style films with him, very realistic. And he really feels for the actors in particular, being as practical as possible is essential. So we didn't have, Brandt, I don't think we didn't have a lot of extensions. We had our cave exterior had a huge extension, right, to connect it to the mountain, where we built that in a field. And then we had to stitch two sets together, our exterior cave up to the bicycle railing, where they came up the stairs up to the bicycle railing, and they were actually looking into a hillside. So we had a set on stage that was what they were looking into, and those were stitched together really well, I thought, by Jason and the visual effects team. And then the other huge piece for them was water clarity. So I think Ron's biggest fear the whole time was not being able to see the actors' faces underwater and knowing who was who and who, because it's the same thing happening over and over again, rescuing in and out. And so we spent a lot of time talking about what they were going to be, what their equipment would be, what their goggles would be, how to make sure they had goggles that light could get through, different colors, masks, not goggles, sorry. And quirky things about their wetsuits too, and what their fins looked like. So but what visual effects did there was added the debris after
Okay.
the fact. I mean, we had one or two issues with water clarity where we couldn't get the water as clean as we wanted to, but in all of our 10-foot deep, 9-foot deep tunnel sets, I don't think we ever really had too many issues, and we were able to keep the water clean. And those tunnel sets were the sort of most important places where you would never know who an actor was, unless the camera was right up on them, because there was no dialogue there. So that's really where visual effects came into play. Brandt, I don't know if you can think of anything else. Rain.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Extended the rain for us.
like you said, so much was in camera, particularly with the water sets, and even with the big sets, like the interior, what we're calling Chamber 1, where we built the big sort of entrance into it. We ended up just hanging blacks instead of any kind of blue screen or whatever to sort of keep it, neutral. And then, yeah, like you say, with the entrance outside with the big set extension, working with Jason and doing illustrations, and we even did a little bit of VR work in that to kind of get people acquainted with the environment, sort of, using our sets and then putting it into even with the goggles and everything else, sort of people could walk through and get a sense of the environment.
Yeah.
I mean, with all this water, I mean, had you ever had much experience working with this level of water on sets before, or were you inventing it?
No, I hadn't. I don't know. I'd had like very minimal experience on Harry Potter. I mean, the good thing about Harry Potter is you had like some experience with everything, a little bit, and then people are like, oh yeah, okay, fine, but really I didn't have, the only thing I had always knew was that pool liners always leak. Water always finds a way out, so, and I'd heard so many horror stories, and I actually talked to Paul Hayes, the construction manager in the UK. I talked to him for, a bit before we left for Australia, about different methodologies. And then Ross Clark, our construction manager down in Australia, he had some experience with it, right, Brandt? Yeah, because we opted for, there's all this the conversation becomes, is it going to be concrete or is it going to be fiberglass? And basically we opted for concrete below the water line, and that worked really well for us. So no, well, Brandt, did you have experience with water?
Yeah, but not to the same. I mean, this was just there were so many logistics as part of the whole water, like it's one thing to work on a project where you have, a couple of sets that are going to go into a tank, or they were all just the coordination of them and having to reuse tanks and having to play with water levels where, we had to give time in between, setups in the first unit and the second unit. There were just so many, there was a lot of constraints and just working out all the water issues aside from the set construction itself.
Yeah, like health problems like hypothermia, and just we're humans, we're not meant to be in water for this long.
No. And so we were going to a place that had no tanks for us to start with, so we had to build all of our tanks, and that is where our process started. And in order to design and build the tanks that the sets were going to go in, we sort of had to also know what the sets were going to be. So to an extent, limiting ourselves. I mean, we built 4 tanks, quite large ones. I think two of them are 100 feet long, right? The others are like 70, Brandt, I think.
Yeah, about that.
Yeah. And they were 9 feet deep or something, 3 meters deep. So that engineering process, I mean, that process was like an engineering marvel unto itself, trying to figure out the filtration system for those 4 tanks, keeping them heated. What happens if you're in more than one tank at the same time? We could never be in all 4 tanks at the same time because of the filtration and water and heating. And then also getting the sets into the tanks without tearing the liner. So it became this, other layer of engineering complication on top of what are the sets going to look like.
how much time did you guys have? And like, I read that you repurposed some of the sets you used for multiple things just for ease or, you know, effectability. Was this a budget constraint or space or just being efficient? Like, how do you unpack all of that?
Brandt, Brandt can get into, he has some photos he can show you of a process of building one of the sets, tearing it down and building another set. One of the things that happened to us, well, we didn't have a lot of time. I mean, Ron and I started the process very early at home. It was COVID, right? And it was pretty much the height of the pandemic. So we were in different, I was working at home. He was working at home. Our first AD was working at home. And then we hired a couple of drafts people in the autumn to sort of help start working through some 3D models. The UK's Terry Fairhurst, who's a set designer in the UK, she was helping us. And then I was drawing some stuff, really pencil sketches, really. And she was interpreting those and starting to work through it. And then Brandt and I didn't get on the ground. Brandt, did you start you started before we left, I think, a little bit, right? But
A little bit. Yeah, it was just right before the new year, I think. And then we
Yeah.
traveled over around like Christmas time and landed in, and then, yeah, there was like quarantine to deal with as well.
we lost 2 weeks to quarantine, pretty much, because you couldn't leave your hotel room, you know, back then. And then we shot in April. So it was very quick. The location that we built this huge, the location for our huge exterior, for the exterior hillside set, for the where all the tents were and the governor's offices and the parks buildings, I guess, I picked over Zoom. So that was slightly worrying. But we had to just go for it, you know. So
It's like, oh, it's pink. Oh,
I know. I'm like, oh, it's a lot smaller than I thought, you know. So it was a crazy experience, but we had such good people on the ground ahead of us. That's what kind of saved us. I mean, our construction and sculpt team and paint team were really incredible. I'm forever grateful to them for their patience, because it was a very convoluted way of starting a project. But Brandt might want to show, why don't you show, Brandt's put together a process of the revamps of a couple of sets.
Sure. Yeah, Chamber 9, which was our first set, which is the kind of the final set in the film in terms of where they find the boys. But I'll bring up my screen here. You guys can see my screen?
yes, we can.
So yeah, Chamber 9, just maybe to back up a little bit, this was an image, I think, on all of our art department office walls of the schematics of the cave, because that was the other thing that was such a challenge, was just the logistics of how we repurpose all of these sets. And so just being constantly going back to, you know, what's the action in terms of the sets that we need to build and how does it flow, and screen direction. And Molly, I remember Ron being very specific about like the left to right, right to left. And then it was really how we repurpose sets and do they work for the screen direction. And there were so many things to kind of figure out on that end. So for me anyway, I constantly had to kind of refer back to the overall map just to figure out like where are all the pieces and how do they fit in the big picture of everything.
This is a map of the real cave. And then I took the script action, and we sort of picked based on the script and action beats that Ron wanted, located those within the real cave so that so everyone could understand how deep in you were supposed to be at that time. Now, our sets didn't really look anything like the real cave except for the entrance, because that's the only thing that people had seen. And a little bit of Chamber 9, but geographically, it just helped everyone understand how deep into the cave we were per each set. Yeah, and we also, the thing that he was talking about, screen direction, also water direction. So if they were swimming in, the water was flowing one way. If they were swimming out, the water was flowing the other way, and someone had to keep track of that all the time. So it wouldn't be backwards when they were shooting.
So Chamber 9 ended up being the first set because it was probably the furthest developed, I think, Molly. Like the one that we had kind of fleshed out the most. And even though naturally you think you'd want to shoot it at the end of the schedule, it just kind of demanded that it was our first setup for a number of reasons.
That's where the boys are found.
Right. Yeah. So again, just like our starting 3D modeling, we had our sort of tank, and the tanks very much were, it was a bit of back and forth between the design of the tanks and the design of the sets. It wasn't kind of done in the perfect order where we could just design the sets and then build tanks around them. We were working with sort of constraints of certain tank sizes and even the stages or the warehouses that we ended up shooting in, because we weren't in the sound stages with any kind of tanks. But so basically taking the shape of Chamber 9, putting it in the sort of predefined tank shape that we had, and then beginning to sort of work on what the overall layouts of the sets would be, and just basic sort of mesh models, and taking into account like the importance of, you know, screen direction and the beats that we knew so far. And so that then went right into physical models, which just helped, you know, you could get everyone around a table and everyone could talk about the action, and we could sort of figure out. I found, Molly, these were really helpful, like in the early phase, right?
Yeah. Ron was skeptical at first that we needed physical models, and I really felt like to understand the texture also for us, and to be able to get everyone around them. We tried VR, and that was not super successful for people. I learned, I had done VR on a film that was like the whole half of the film was VR. So I had done a lot of it in sets that were larger, but we found in the tunnels, it was making people pretty uncomfortable, like car sick, when they had to navigate their way through a small tunnel set on VR. So we sort of abandoned that, and then moved on to these carved models. And then Ron was actually very excited once we started presenting these to him later in the day, so that everybody could get around them.
And from the model, we kind of went back and forth with the physical models to the 3D models, to line shots up, and again, like texture and working with the sculptors. Liam Beck was illustrating for us as well at the same time, doing stuff. So really kind of using all of the, you know, methods to sort of push the designs along. And then even, Molly, I think this was, you and I were still in quarantine, as I recall, and we were having like full-size mock-ups done and basically just getting images sent to us over the internet, so we could just see again, like, what did this space look like? So there was a lot of full-scale mock-ups just to try to make sure that the proportions were right. So again, as our bunch of our carpenters, you know, standing in.
How many people you could fit on the?
Yeah, exactly.
Could you fit all 13?
Yeah.
Up on dry land. That's what they're doing there.
And then, so this is like, beginning of January, I think I'm just maybe still a week in quarantine at this point, Molly, maybe you're out. Right, yeah. And then we get these warehouses, and we're in Yatlow, which is an industrial suburb of the Gold Coast. And we're in basically, not what you would call a soundstage. So we're having to, you know, do our best to fit these sets into these spaces. We don't have much headroom. The roofs are not really, you know, we can't really rig much from above, and there's, you know, obviously a bunch of limitations. But a couple of weeks in, and we're beginning to build. The tank walls are going in, and we're also doing CNC profiles and a bunch of things to try to get the shape worked out for these sets, because the design is sort of still evolving in terms of just making sure that all the proportions are right. So now we're maybe 3 weeks into the build, and there was, you know, much conversation about the slope, you know, for where the boys are ultimately found and what that angle is, and getting the right sort of angles for that. So basically it's just rapid fire. I think at this point we had crews working pretty much 7 days a week to meet the schedule. Were, you know, adjustments all along the way in terms of after every walkthrough, we would get a confirmation on, you know, another wall that needed to wild, or another lighting position, or shooting portals. And, you know, divers would also kind of walk the sets. And that's part of something I'll show in a second in terms of our methodology for creating those sets. Figuring out what camera angles kind of work. We're lucky that our construction crew had a number of rock molds that we could repurpose to get a lot of texture very quickly. And we had an amazing sculpt team that then could just only add to that.
So this example that Brandt is showing you is only for our chamber sets, which had dialogue in them, and the tunnels were like another thing. The tunnels were those were the big serious tanks with the filtration system. These tanks will only allow, I think, up to 5 feet of water. Is that right, Brandt? We could only get 5 feet, I think, in any of these. So anything. So, but and I was a little bit worried about that at first, but actually, because there was just for ease and comfort for the divers and popping up, there was a lot of popping up, rinsing your mask, checking your breathing, checking the kids' breathing, that kind of thing. The 5 feet ended up being plenty of water for these sets that we call them chamber sets that had the dialogue in them. This was our deepest set, actually. So
yeah,
this is our, in terms of paint, just a random thought, that it's the darkest set. It's almost black. It's like a funeral, like a casket. Really morbid. It's like where their potential grave,
Could
had
be forever.
And then it gets kind of lighter as you get closer to the entrance.
And then for the swim in tunnel, which leads into chamber 9, sort of came up with this method of wireframing with just pencil rod and then covering it with shade cloth to get people to really feel the space and feel the volume. And it allowed us to really sort of offer something up, have, everyone walk through it, get the proportions right, make sure that it was as tight as it could be, make sure that diver safety and everything was considered. And it was really easy and flexible to adjust these pieces. Let's give a little sort of video here through of what we did, but
yeah, anyone who's listening to this, if you ever are watching this, I highly recommend this method because everyone gets excited, everyone's looking at the same thing, and it's really easy and to change things also and add, and you can mark it where you want to add camera ports or safety exits and things like that. And once they go through it, you can adjust and everyone can go through it again. And then you get to a point where it's signed off on, and then you can just go for it and really make it, put some, unique rock textures in various places and just really get into it from there. It was a very successful way of working for us.
Yeah. So we would go from that to that. This is that same piece, basically. There were some modifications along the way. And then basically we would make wild portals on the side so it could get enclosed in, or, you had safety to be able to get into your access if there was ever kind of a safety issue. Yeah, and then this were, a couple months in. Water level, actually, that was something I was going to mention as well. Was just an ongoing conversation about getting the water level right. And then this is where, from that tunnel, that the dive team needed to swim in. So getting that as tight as possible while still maintaining some degree of believability.
Yeah.
And this is that same piece.
Oh, go ahead, Brandt.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is going back. This is that same piece that was just covered with the cloth before, basically textured and with the wild walls that can get applied to the outside.
I mean, when you have someone, a really confident director who, we were fortunate, right? Ron knows what he's looking for. Once he sees it, he can tell you what he needs, and he could look at this and say, we don't need this side to be finished, and then because he's confidently seeing how he's going to shoot it. And so that obviously becomes really helpful for everybody if a whole side of the tunnel is open.
Yeah. And working, I mean, he must have spent time, thinking of storyboarding and working all that out. Did you have an ample amount of time to storyboard the most difficult sequences for the sets and the location? I mean, how much advanced working did you guys figure out before you even chose how you were going to design those?
Well, it's interesting. When I started with him in August, we started, once we had a studio in August, we hired storyboard artists and we started working on sequences. And it wasn't, in the end, we kind of threw them out because it was so hard to understand the space without being in it. So it ended up being more once we built those wireframes, and we had some 3D models that we used to storyboard a little bit. But once we built the wireframes, the second unit director could go in and record pieces for Ron. And he had very specific elements. I need this to be a place where someone has to turn sideways and pull themselves through, or they need to push the child through first and then come through. You know, we need a rock collapse here. And then we would offer up interesting things to happen too, to create tension, you know, and then he could play those out in those full-size mock-ups. So I mean, the storyboards were helpful to maybe talk through events early on, but we just definitely found that even the 3D modeling helped some, but it didn't really get us where we wanted to get to until we had those mock-ups. Emma's here.
I see. Welcome, Emma.
Good morning,
Hello.
Emma.
Good morning. Sorry, this is the first time I've spoken today. Good morning.
It's okay.
Nice to see you all.
I see you. And you mentioned you started in April, but how long was this shoot from start to finish after you've made all these beautiful rocks?
It was short.
Wow.
June. We finished in June. No, that can't be right. Is that right?
Yeah, that's
July?
right. No,
July?
June. It was like mid-June. Mid-June.
Yeah. Why was it so short? I mean, how many weeks was it? 40 weeks? I mean, 40 days?
Yeah,
45
something like that.
45 days?
Yeah.
So it was supposed to be a little bit different. We were supposed to have, because we had all the intent, initially the underwater work was supposed to be all second unit and doubles for the actors. So they were going to work simultaneously. So essentially we were doing 80 days and 40 days, which is, as you can imagine, kind of a nightmare. But then the lead actors decided to do their own stunt work.
I read about that.
Yeah.
They did a lot of their underwater work.
Yeah, and then it became even more convoluted. So suddenly we were getting sets ready on a different schedule. They were shooting 7 days a week, or some to get the actors into the tunnels on the weekends. Not all the actors would. Some of the actors would let doubles shoot some of the things for them, but a lot of it they wanted to do themselves. So that it was complicated. Basically
Claustrophobic. I mean, that's
Yeah.
crazy. And like on that note, safety, I mean, that must have been a massive concern with the diving team, and the cast must have been an important part of your design process as well, as to making sure those spaces were safe. How did you incorporate the safety into a quick egress, into an emergency in case something should happen? I mean, some of the caves looked like they had ceilings and like really low ceilings and extremely tight spaces. I mean, I can imagine if something went wrong, that would be a nightmare.
Yeah, some of them, yes, it would have been, but we had an amazing team. We had incredible dive team, safety divers, stunt divers, and very, and our stunt coordinator / second AD was really confident and really supportive of Ron's idea of trying to do as much in camera as possible. And so everyone just worked toward making these tunnels as safe, but also as complete as possible, and I think, again, it helps that Ron knew how he wanted to shoot certain things too. I was going to share something, but I have to see if I can find it. He could say like, oh, let's take this side off here. We definitely don't need this piece, or this piece we're going to shoot from above. So we don't need anything. We don't need a top piece on this one. And then we had camera ports that also you could swim out of too. You know, we kind of worked that out with the safety team as we went. And I think it's just a credit to the only way it worked is because they were all there and on the ground with us every single day and working it out with us. I think, Brandt, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, and I think just, with those walkthroughs of the sets, and the full scale mock-ups were really helpful. I mean, there were times where we would make something that we thought was as tight as it could be. And, Charlie, the second unit director, would be, no, even more. And like, I think some of the sets, there was like 18 inches for the diver. Again, we're looking at these sets when they're just wireframes, but they're going to be swimming in them when they're, fully submerged. There were things like making sure that we had lines of sight for the safety divers at all times. So if we had a wild portal and a diver turned a corner, that there was another portal that another diver safety guy could pick him up on the other side. But yeah, this photo here is a good example of this open set, but basically there were all walls that could enclose it wherever need be on the side, and ceiling pieces could fly up as well.
Yeah, these pieces right in here could come in and out. And then this was probably, 14 to 18 inches in places. So they were dragging themselves through this area right here. And then it had a drop down in it from here down to here too. And then you could go the other direction, obviously, and pull yourself up in that one. And then this is an example. So this is one of the tanks that's not complete yet because they weren't completed until the sets were in them. So the set went into this tank. The side would then be attached to the tank, and then it would be, and then it was, filled up to here with water.
Wow.
Which I think, I have, another picture of here. You can get a sense of what they all kind of look like. So this is our tank. This is our tank stage right here. These would be placed for darkness over the top, so you're really like kind of buried in there. And then there's some lighting going on, but you can see that these are the pumps that filtered the water all the way through too. So this is half of a very large stage, and this half was the tanks.
That's so impressive. Everything just has this really realistic feel to it for a completely constructed place. And what about how did you research all of this? Like, what about like some of the original rescue operation materials? Did you have access to that, or how much of this was winging?
There was our producer was making a documentary at the same time, which a lot of people have seen, and not realized it's the same. And we were the same under the same umbrella as the documentary. So because of that, we had access to the divers, and the particularly two of them, Rick Stanton, who was the kind of Viggo Mortensen character, and another Jason Mallinson, one of the other divers, were with us from, was it 2 weeks? I think 2 weeks out, Emma, like, was it 2 weeks before shooting? I don't know, again, with quarantine, one of them got COVID and then got delayed. It was kind of wild, but so they were with us, and they brought some of their equipment, and they were like, and because they were really diving, right, the equipment had to work and had to be real. So, but they were really helpful with Lisa Brennan, our prop master, helping her, get the right sort of everything, the right equipment, the most accurate, realistic equipment. So, and then helped her teach the actors how to put everything on. Also, because those kinds of cave rescue divers it's different than open water rescue. Their equipment is slightly different, and they had been doing it for so long that they had their own little quirks and details about their equipment that they liked to use. And it didn't look, it wasn't maybe as slick or as professional looking in some cases. So that all those little details were really helpful, just making each character unique. So we were very lucky to have them with us. most of the time we felt lucky. Sometimes we didn't feel lucky to have them with us. And like Emma could talk about, you know, we had Rick Stanton there when Emma was dressing what was to be his house. So I don't know if anyone remembers from the film, but his house was a mess. Like he had stuff everywhere and he was constantly working on gear. And that our set version of his house was basically his real house. And we had, you know, so Emma was able to talk to him a lot.
Yes, just to confirm things like how he got his drill press into his living room. He had his kayak set up in front of his fireplace. Yeah, it was great, actually. They were very generous with all that information, right down to you know, types of things that have in their jars on the kitchen benches and the style of coffee you know, they prefer to drink and that sort of thing. So that was great to have access to Rick and John, actually, for both of those sets.
Yeah, and also, I mean, besides the diving, you know, for the culturally, also we had a Thai art director who came on early in prep, Lek, who came to be with us. We had Emma had some Thai buyers in her department, and we of course had Sayampu, our DP. So having them around also was a huge gift. And Emma you might want to talk a little bit about that, like you're connecting with the local Thai community to sort of help us with the meanings of lots of things and certain ceremonies. In the movie, there are all these religious ceremonies. Some of them we filmed even more than we showed. Those all came out of the art department's research and getting Ron kind of excited about what we discovered went on at the cave site, because you had where this particular region, there was like a kind of mix of Buddhism and a sort of more of a like a folk mountain region religion, I guess, sort of a little bit different. And then there were all these other religions and spiritual points of view of people who came to the site. And Emma really got into all of those, and it brought so much to the film, I thought.
And
yes,
go ahead, sorry.
Oh, sorry, no, I was just going to add to that with the Thai buyers, B and Yoon. Lek, of course, we also had access to graphic design ex-Thailand, which meant all the styles, fonts and colours, you know, were immediately correct. And I believe some of the work actually came out of, you know, some of the print shops that printed for the rescue effort. A couple of the buyers were very familiar with the Chiang Rai region. So we had access to a lot of the everyday places that you would buy things like plastic chairs and umbrellas and, you know, just those ubiquitous items from that actually probably came from the stores that sort of supplied the effort. It was such a massive effort that I think in the Chiang Rai, Chiang Mai and beyond regions, things were being bought out wholly and solely and ended up coming from other countries in the end as well. We had access to the Chiang Rai hospital, which was great because we ended up through the Thai connection getting hospital sheets, hospital gowns. They have a very specific graphic on them. So to have access to all of that really bedded in the reality. And in fact, I think that was the first scene we shot, was the hospital scene, and to have that correct with the set dressing elements of certainly through, you know, the bedding and linens from the actual hospital was really helpful. I thought it was a good way to start. So that was invaluable, really, just those Thai elements that you think, well, you can swap them out for pretty much anything. You could print them, but there was just something about knowing it was from the region itself. So we were very grateful for that Thai connection, that's for sure.
And you brought a lot of things in, and I've read that you had to amass a whole lot of things to bring in, because of course you're not going to find it in Australia.
Yeah, that's right. And we were very specific about what we brought in too. There were always sort of, you know, questions around bringing in things like cheap plastic chairs, which, you know, you can get in, you know, every other hardware store. But they they all have their certain looks. There's, each sort of country has got different colours and negative spaces sort of, cut into their versions of plastic chairs. And there were so many of them. And they were really, they became a real feature of the sets. But just to get those nuanced colours, all the negative spaces in those objects right, it meant you could really reuse and use them throughout the entire base camp, which was we had 2 sections that we did keep repopulating, the base camp 1 to 2. All the tents were very important. That was something that we could not get in this country. You couldn't even fabricate it, for the budget. It was, or time wouldn't allow it either. So the tents were critical, and we did sort of revise down. I mean, honestly, in my mind at the time, I could have filled 3 containers, but we did revise down to 1, which included a lot of the spiritual elements, candles, incense, just so that the colours once again and the proportions were correct, especially if you have, you've got your cast, you've got your extras from the region, just to sort of add to that authenticity, so that when you're bundling things, it's just it became a very natural thing for them to pick the 3 incense sticks up to actually place onto shrines. And that was all something that they would know. The colours of the candles were really quite yellow. There was nothing we could get here comparative. You could get a few, but the quantity we needed was, we did need to ship out. So those elements and other spiritual elements were critical. So we were very grateful when that arrived. It was tight, very tight. COVID gave us, a lengthy shipping time, almost double what it is. Costs on that were triple. And interestingly, only recently for us in Australia, maybe 2 months ago, the shipping came back to pre-pandemic levels. So that really did impact all of those things significantly, budget-wise. So we were, the tents once again were very, very important. So.
Yeah, Emma fought really hard for all of that stuff, and we, in the end, everyone realized how they, producers finally sort of relented maybe and realized how important it all was after. So to her credit, was very just pushing and showing everyone the reference, and just really making people understand, very patiently making people understand how important it was.
You need that unfamiliarity that, you as a viewer, you're watching something. If you can't immediately recognize it, it sells that story of it being elsewhere. You really need that to be unfamiliar. And this was all set and shot in Australia. I mean, there must have been a myriad of design challenges of shooting there, because it was such a well-documented event as well. Obviously occurring in Thailand, so you can't sell that for Australia. The set deck, I mean, it's fantastic. You made a whole new world. It was a and that was the beauty of it, actually. That was the great challenge, was to rise to that world building of creating Thailand and Australia. We, as we all do, we had large, immensely talented teams to pull it off. We had a moment where I think we were due to shoot in Thailand, maybe for 2 or 3 weeks, and that got pulled due to a COVID ramp up. And so we decided to shoot those scenes in Australia, albeit very quickly at the end, just as we'd sort of thought we'd come to the top of the hill. And then, yes, we ended up creating several more sets, which was that was challenging, but everybody banded together. We had the right equipment, and just made that work towards the end. Great. Something that's very close to my heart, the advocacy of production design, is how what we do affects other people's experiences and how they do their jobs built on the world and the vibes that we create. I'd love to hear a little bit of your thoughts on the importance of the production design on these particular actors' performances, because I feel specifically in this film, it made such a difference to their world, the claustrophobia, the fear, the actual putting yourself in peril the whole time. You're just on tenterhooks. I'd love to hear how that process was symbiotic.
Yeah, I think it takes it takes a certain kind of actor too to be willing to embrace how far you want to push things, you know. And I think Ron is so good at making everyone feel like they're part of this unified collaborative process. I mean, everybody's ideas, the actors' ideas, anyone in the art department can have an idea, like all of that is how you make a successful film with such a, you know, enveloping environment, I guess. So, you know, we were really proud of how authentic everything looked and felt. And it felt like, you know, the first day that all the actors were in the water on Chamber 9 and they realized they were going to be spending 2 weeks there in the water it was interesting to watch how they handled that. And you could see, because the set was so small, because it was full of water, because it was so dark and wet, and there was, you know, water dripping all the time and everything. And then, you know, once they brought the kids in, I think everyone just felt like we're really here, you know. And I do believe that it helped their performances. There's like no question that, you know, maybe adding fear unnecessary, maybe adding a little bit of fear, you know, and also learning to scuba dive in these small spaces. But I think we were really proud of that. And even out on the location, it seemed very important when we built that exterior set that they could have this walk all the way up, you know, through the camp that's full of activity and very well choreographed activity by the art department and the 80s. Again, together, we helped choreograph everything that went on behind actors and all the action. You know, they had this walk through the camp, up these long stairs, and could walk fairly deeply into this cave to this railing and walk back out and down again. And all of that just added to their understanding and experience of what it was like to bring the kids, you know, to go in every day, to have to go in and face this beast of these long tunnels every day, and then pray that they were going to get these kids out, you know, cross their fingers, whatever. And then also the kind of relentless rain, even all of that. Like I do think, and it was cold and muddy, very muddy. And we discussed mud, you know, and levels of mud and stages of mud, you know, but that again was because with the ADs, the director, everybody was on the same page, creating this environment with the actors. So I'm really proud of how cohesive it all was and how well it worked and how enthusiastic the actors were to participate and kind of go for it.
That's great. I mean, if they weren't acting, they looked terrified. You know, I was terrified myself just being there. It was so dark. I mean, and on that level, what were you doing about practical lighting? I mean, there's the helmet lights, but I mean, you're in a dark cave. How do you can't put kinos in there?
Yeah, no, we started working out the lighting actually in our concept art early on with Sayampu. We just presented him with some things, but then we started talking about light levels, and we wanted everything to look like it was helmet lighting. We went through a period, at one point we were going to use these glow sticks throughout, you know, just to add some dimension. And those ended up I think we ended up eliminating all of that. But yeah, everything was to look like, in the tunnels, everything had to look like it was helmet lighting. So people had two, and then, you know, if 2 or 3 people were in a line, then you could have an excuse to have a little bit more lighting bouncing off the walls, you know. And then we decided, and Emma will remember this more, we decided that electricity ran to chamber 3, a third chamber, I think. And based on our documentation, there were cables had been laid by, I think, a Chinese rescue team that had come. Electrical cables had been laid up to a certain point in the cave. And so we used that as a way of having lighting in our chambers up to a certain point. And then by the time you get to the chamber 9, the only lighting is these torches, and then that's why the kids keep their lights off further down it. But Sayampu was great. He kind of we tested some things out. We went over to the construction shop with him and the second unit DP, turned the lights off, ran the torches along the texture, some samples of cave walls to check the color and the darkness and what happens when the walls are dripping and there's just a little bit of color in them and the light runs against them. What does that look like? Do we need to have more sort of colored sort of strata in the cave walls? So they were really helpful in participating in that process.
Would you guys have done anything differently or better in your process? Would you made any changes in your process as you went along?
Brandt, what would you say? There's one tunnel set that became the bane of our existence because we had to rush it and build it out of fiberglass instead of concrete.
I mean, that was the thing, is we just kind of ran out of time at one point where this big push to get chamber 9 ready, and then everything else was just, incrementally tighter and tighter and tighter. And we had one set where really we'd done everything pretty much in concrete up to that point, and there was no way we could meet the timeline. We had to go with fiberglass. And the other thing too is our big, there was a crew, and there was so many. It's just I agree. That was kind of one thing where we just had to make.
What happened with that set was we painted it, and we then didn't have enough time to let it sit before we filled it, and then we were rushed to fill it. And then the paint just started coming off, basically. So over a period of a number of days that they were using this set, we just watched more and more paint come off these stalactites.
And your water gets more murky and more murky.
Murkier, yeah. And that was a little bit painful. And even in the film, Ron chose not to touch up some of it because he thought it looked good, like calcification. But every time I see those shots in the film, I'm like, oh. That's the only one. Other than that, I don't know about you guys, but we sort of somehow got through it fairly successfully, except for that one.
Well, everything I've read from Ron Howard says he was absolutely complimentary of your design and blown away. What was it like working with him and directors of his magnitude in general? Is it a battle of egos, or is it, somebody that professional? Is it actually super, super helpful with all of his knowledge in getting into your world?
Yeah, no, he's his knowledge, he shares his knowledge so easily. He loves the process of filmmaking. He loves the prep period. He loves the art department. He will say that he is not a visual person, which I think which is not true, but he says that. And will just rely on his art department in a really collaborative way. So he's really great to work with, and so inviting of everyone into the process. He likes when you have script comments. He likes when you have costume comments. He kind of views a production designer in a sort of the old school way of working, where you're really overseeing the look of the whole film. So he wants us involved in like shaping everything, so that includes in costumes as well, which I don't know. Anyway, but in this case, it was easy to be part of that because there was just research and there was so much to do. Then we all sort of it was like a very collaborative team effort. But because he creates that environment, everyone feels comfortable in it, and I think that's how you can make a film like this at this level in this amount of time, in such a short amount of time. Because even the last film I did with him too, we didn't have a lot of time, but we just pushed through somehow. And he, every day he gives a little speech at the beginning of the day,
Oh, nice.
encouraging people, complimenting people, and really helping everyone remember that everybody's doing it together. So that's
the way to work.
yeah, it's great.
Well, it's a freaking fantastic film with incredible production design, beautiful set deck, art direction. It's madness what you guys were able to come up with in the time frames and all the constrictions, and during COVID. It's so well deserving of winning the BFDG award for feature films. And I just can't thank you guys enough and commend you enough for your incredible work on this.
Thanks for having us.
Thank
And
you.
thanks to everyone for voting for our film. It was really fun to be there.
I'm glad you liked it. And I think we've answered all of our questions. We still have 5 minutes left. If anybody else out there in the world, do you have any more questions? While we're waiting for those, tell me how you felt when you were watching it finally edited together. I know you said that you were like scheming out a bit about seeing fiberglass. It's not how. How did you feel? Were you able to immerse yourself into that story and forget that you had built all that under duress?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Brandt and I, after, I forget if we saw it around the same time. I had seen an early cut of it because we had to do a few visual effects things later on, in post, fix a few things. But I hadn't really seen it with the sound and everything else. And Brandt, I think we both kind of were so surprised in a way that we were like, I can't believe we actually did that. We managed to make it work. I mean, to James Wilcox, our editor's credit, I can't believe he managed to take like 7 hours of footage and whittle it down to a 2-hour movie and figure out who was swimming in and who was swimming out and what diver was doing this, and turn it into something that kept you kind of on the edge of your seat. So grateful for him in that process. He made our work look really good.
And I went to see it with a lot of the crew here who, were involved, obviously. And I think when we came out of that screening that was held in Southport, everybody was really, really thrilled and impressed with what we'd just seen. And a lot of the younger crew, it was the first film they'd ever worked on, they are still thoroughly impressed with it. And it was a great experience actually after the first screening for us here.
Yeah, when you work on a film of that size, everybody can still feel like they're a part of it, even like the juniors in the department. Like we had an open plan office. So everyone was throwing ideas into the ring at all times, and we were all participating, and everyone was seeing what the tunnels were looking like, and when you have that experience, it's like, then it feels like everybody's film, and then if the film is good, then it feels really good. If the film is bad, doesn't feel as good, but it still feels like it's everybody's film, which is great.
We've got a couple extra questions. The rock faces looked incredibly organic and realistic. How much guidance or autonomy did the art department give to the plasterers?
We had reference, like big walls of rock reference that we liked, and had these huge boards and put them up, and we created a kind of vocabulary for our film that evolved. Once we figured out Chamber 9, it sort of evolved from there. So, and when we saw how successful Chamber 9 was, we were pretty excited by that and kind of, kept going in that direction. So it was definitely Andy, our painter, and Alex, our sculptor, were involved in. We had all these conversations about the depth, how far into the cave, and how it should feel, and then should we go lighter here, should we go darker, and very graphic texture versus less so. I sort of felt that the more graphic, the better. to read on film. You know, it becomes less successful, I think, in film when it starts to just look like a crumpled paper bag.
Mhm.
So, and you can't really tell where you are, but the fissures in the rock help you kind of geographically define where you are, the way it's sort of like architecture. So, and create these really lovely deep shadows. So we did a lot of what Brandt is showing you now. We did a lot of that up front. And then, you know, once we got into that pressurized situation where we were working so fast and working around the clock, we had a couple of moments of, you know, quality control where everyone's exhausted, but, you know, moments, but we sort of paused and we did undo a couple of things and then redid them, but everyone was happy that we did that, you know, but because we had sort of defined this vocabulary at the beginning, I think everyone knew what to do, really. Would you say, Brandt? I think that's sort of how it went.
Yeah, we kind of refined the process along the way, and then there was a shorthand, and we had such great reference, and they were able to interpret it really well and just even add to it. And yeah, it's just a fantastic sculpt team. But yeah,
Amazing team.
It looks amazing.
Yeah. We used some caves in Vietnam. I think they were in Vietnam as our reference, because our cave was not very interesting it was all kind of soft and had no real texture and full of sand. So we were able to just look elsewhere for a reference that we liked.
Cool. One last question before we wrap up. Did Director Ron Howard get in the water?
I think he did.
Did he point at things from the side? Did he get
Well,
down?
you know, he did not have a wetsuit, but he had waders for some of the sets he got in the water. But we created these ports in all the sets where he could sit really next to the set. Like he was always on the set, and he could race in quickly and race out, you know, and be right in the action, because we created these sort of barn doors of rock barn doors in various places on all the sets. So he could get in and out quickly, which he seemed to love. He did not, and with the underwater, he didn't do that. It would have been not, he had a couple of stories about splash.
Oh.
And he's done his time in scuba gear. So I think he left it to other people in this case.
Well, that's all great stuff. I loved hearing all of this. I hope all of you out there really enjoyed this. It's really fantastic meeting the three of you and hearing these tales. And if you haven't seen it, I saw a couple of people said they hadn't seen it all the way. Watch it. It's absolutely, you'll be like the whole time, even though you know they all come out.
Yes,
so thank you again very much for coming. And for those of you who would like some more information about the BFDG, including membership, all that information can be found at britishfilmdesigners.com. And there will be eventually a recording of this afterwards. So thank you guys once again for joining me. And thank you out there in the internet for tuning in. Good night.
Thanks, Blair.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.